Thanks for the little intro and letting us know, how you kind of got into this. Why don't you let us know what some of your studies have taken you into, some of the findings? I understand you just got back from Peru, and there's some interesting things there. So why don't you go ahead and let us share with us?
Well, we were in Peru in February for about 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks, and what we saw there was mind-blowing, and we've documented this in a DVD called The Secret Cosmic War. It's Watchers 7. We have 7 of these DVDs. My partner and good friend Richard Shaw and myself, we produce and do these. We fund them ourselves, and we've sold thousands and thousands, and this one seems to have hit a nerve. But the accompanying that is a book that I've written called On the Trail of the Nephilim, and that thing is selling literally like hotcakes. People are hungry for the information. It is an oversized book, 8.5 by 11. Full color print, high glossy paper, and the reason why we did that is we wanted people to be able to see the photographs. We didn't want to cheese out and put all the photographs like most people do in the middle of the book, and it's a small book. Well, you can't see anything. You can't appreciate what we saw. So we spent extra money. We got the high gloss paper, the 4-color printing, and the pictures are, as you're reading, the picture's right there on the next page or right above you as you're reading. So you follow along and you can really see what I uncovered. And I think the both of them, we actually have a special on the Trail of the Nephilim and Watcher 6. You save $10. It's a $50 value. We're selling for $40. So it's I think it's worth it. Again, we've sold thousands of these things, and we can't barely keep up with the shipping. That's what's going on. We've hit a nerve here. On the Trail of the Nephilim shows from the beginnings, in the beginning of the book, talks about the cover-up by the Smithsonian Institute, or what I believe is a cover-up by the Smithsonian Institute. What I mean by that, during the latter part of the 19th century into the 20th century, mounds all through the Americas and other places were discovered. And primitive archaeological digs were done, and some of these skeletons were 9, 10, 11, pushing 12 feet in height. And they had double rows of teeth and 6 fingers and 6 toes. We have account after account after account. We know this happened. We also know that the Smithsonian sent teams to go about and collect these bones and bring them back to the Smithsonian Institute, where, of course, they have remained hidden from the world for probably over 100 years. And the reason for this is these bones prove the biblical narrative. And the Smithsonian and those of that ilk are ardent Darwinists. And so this throws a monkey wrench, the discovery of these bones, throws a monkey wrench into the Darwinian paradigm. It also definitely challenges the Beringian concept or theory. In other words, during the last ice age, the people crossed across the Bering Strait, and they populated the Americas. And according to the Darwinists, they were there hunting megafauna, and it's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. It's we've got a site, and we talk about this in the book. It's called America's Stonehenge, and that site has been carbon dated to about 4,000 years old for starters. But what's interesting about this, like many of these areas throughout the Americas, this place is a henge, and a henge is a circular edifice, basically, for lack of a better word. It's a circular structure. Usually have a moat in the inside of it. And these are astronomical observatories, and so they have standing stones placed around the perimeter and maybe 100 or 200 yards away from the center of the henge. So, for instance, we just have the longest day in the year several weeks back, to the summer solstice, and that stone would be standing on the outskirts of the henge. And so if you stood in the center of the henge and you looked at the standing stone, let's say 100 yards away, you would watch on the summer solstice, you would watch the sun come up directly over that standing stone. So that's very deliberate. Well, it gets even better. The owner's son, Kelsey Stone, who is a college student, I think he's 23 years old now, was playing on Google Earth. And what he did, he drew a line from the center of the America Stonehenge out to the summer solstice standing stone, and then continued the line. And to his utter shock and amazement, he wound up in Stonehenge, England, splitting the center trilithon in half. That's very deliberate. And I've spoken to a surveyor, and there's absolutely no way to do that in the ancient world, short of being in the air. Who is the prince of the power of the air? And there's your answer. It's Nephilim architecture. But wait, it gets even better than that. When Kelsey extended the line from New Hampshire to Stonehenge and further, he wound up in Beirut, Lebanon. Beirut, Lebanon is the home of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were descendants of the Canaanites, and the Canaanites are one of the Nephilim tribes listed in Numbers and elsewhere in our Bible. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Getting a lot of static.
Okay. Sorry, it seems to have cleared up. I don't know what's going on. I heard it too, but it seems to be gone.
Okay.
Okay, you want to go ahead then, or?
Well, I mean, that's just one of the astounding discoveries which we talk about On the Trail of the Nephilim.
Okay, well, in response to what you said about this with hiding these bones, yes, you're absolutely right. It kind of puts a little bit of a crimp in their Darwinian theory that, we started out small and puny and humped over, and we're getting bigger and stronger and more godlike, when all of a sudden it seems like it's just the opposite. Now, you mentioned something that was very interesting here, and we got a comment. I'm sorry, I am parched this evening. About 10 fingers and 10 toes. We indeed read of this in Scripture. And it's interesting because I don't remember where I heard it, but, this thing where Indians put their hand up and they say, how? It is my understanding that was because of these 6-fingered, 6-toed people that they did that to say, hey, I've only got 5 like you. Have
That's
you run
exactly
into this
true.
in your study? Could you elaborate a little on that for us?
Well, that is, I've heard that, and I've talked about it on Coast to Coast and other radio shows. I've vetted it with several Native American people, and what they were doing is the Native Americans knew about these giants. I mean, we actually interviewed a man by the name of Robert Mirabal, who's a past Pueblo. And the reason why I did this, and this is all in the book On the Trail of the Nephilim, was because he's like an artist, okay? And he's also a Grammy Award-winning artist. And he had this pageant, or a play, I should say, for lack of a better word. Had a play that he put together, and it was on YouTube. It was called Stilt Walker. And when I saw this, I about fell out of my chair. I couldn't believe it. And what it is it shows Native Americans in full Native American regalia, and they are the narrative that you hear right from the beginning of this play, and it's held outdoors, and the music's incredible, the lighting's amazing. It's just very edgy, very artsy, well-crafted, and really well done. And again, it's called Stilt Walker, Robert Mirabal, if you're interested in Googling it on YouTube and seeing it for yourself. Well, Robert begins the narrative, and it says the sky people, the sky gods, came to earth because they saw the men and women, and they bore children by them, and these were the giants. I mean, it echoes Genesis 6 almost exactly. And as the play continues, this man on stilts comes walking out who's like over 10 feet tall, and it goes on from there. But obviously what piqued my interest is that his story, which when I asked him, I interviewed him, and he heard it from his grandfather, who heard it from his father, who heard it from his father, who heard it from his grandfather, and back and back and back and back and back, oral tradition. And this oral tradition echoes what we believe as Christians in the Bible, verbatim, literally verbatim, almost word for word. And they know, his people know, that this was real, that these giants were here. They know that. And so it's just astounding that it's right in front of us, and yet the nonsense we're taught in school and the history books, frankly, need to be rewritten.
Well, L.A., that's interesting, too, because, I try to sift and sort things through the scriptures, and when we read of the story of David, for example, slaying Goliath, a lot of people, I didn't catch until it was pointed out, he picked up 5 stones. It wasn't because he was afraid he was going to miss. He was prepared to take on his 4 brothers right then and there and be done with it. And we have a description of what says like to be the last giant, but that's another matter, I expect, where we are given the dimensions of his bed. And I did a little calculation by what I have, and his bed was like 13 feet tall, if memory serves. So we do have things in the scriptures that say that these were literal physical giants, and I've even gone into, when you start looking into Greek mythology type of thing, it kind of fits that's what these were, what we would call today a demigod, that were giants and big and that type of thing. You run into that?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is, again, I've written 6 books on the subject, and it is what it is. Actually, 7 books. This is, what am I saying? This is number 7, and this is, again, it's the key to prophecy. It's the key to Scripture, in my opinion. I don't think we can understand what the Book of Revelation tells us unless we know about the Nephilim. I don't think we can understand the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah unless we understand about the Nephilim. I don't think we can fully appreciate or come to an understanding of one of the most bizarre chapters in the Bible, where God, our loving, holy God, tells us, or tells Joshua and Caleb and the Israelites, to go into Canaan and wipe everybody out, men, women, and children, burn the animals, destroy the cities. That sounds like genocide to me, and there's no way around it, unless what was there was not human. And, of course, when you factor in the Nephilim, everything makes sense. Otherwise, we serve a genocidal, maniacal, crazed God. And the text I use in On the Trail of the Nephilim to shore up that position is that God sends Jonah to Nineveh to preach to them. And the Ninevites, in my opinion, invented the word barbarian. These guys were absolutely bloodthirsty, and they were barbaric to the nines. When you arrived in Nineveh, if you were stupid enough to go, encircling the city were thousands of heads impaled on pointed stakes. Nightmare. Absolute nightmare. Human prisoners were flayed alive, and their skin tacked up on the walls of the city. I mean, this is crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. And yet, God sends Jonah to have them repent. There's grace and mercy being extended to the people of Nineveh. There is no grace and mercy anytime the Nephilim are present.
Wow. I'd like to take just a slight little detour for a moment before we get into our subject about your travels to Peru, because one of the things you mentioned, Darwin, and I know one of the things that also throws a little monkey wrench in the works is these things that are known as the Ica stones of Peru, and there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them, that show man with dinosaurs at the same time. Did you run into any of those or see any of those while you were there?
We did not go to the Ica stones. I've read about them. I'm still not sure. I think some of them are hoaxes, but I think others are the real thing. Obviously, if they are real, it's astounding. And probably when we go down again, we'll try to take a side trip and check them out. But this trip we did not see them.
Okay. So now back to some of these structures that we find around the world, or the Stonehenge and some of these others I'm sure you'll mention, it seems that when we start plotting these on a map and start drawing lines between them, it seems like they line up with the Earth's ley lines and things like this. Can you get into that for us some?
Well, we did. And look, we're not the first researchers to come up with this. My partner Richard Shaw and I had sort of a cosmic download while we were in Cusco in Peru, about 12,000 feet above sea level. And what was amazing about our cosmic download, we realized that the days of Noah are much more complex than we ever imagined. And for one, there was a grid. The Satan, the fallen one, established a grid over the entire planet. And I believe that it was used in antiquity, thousands of years ago, to enslave the human race, which is why the destruction of everything, which is why we see many of these ancient megalithic structures in ruins. They're not, it looks like when we were in Ollantaytambo, okay, in the so-called Temple of the Sun, something cataclysmic destroyed this temple, and no one knows what. But these very large blocks, 60, 80, 100-ton stones, were washed or moved in a very cataclysmic event from the top of the mountain where the temple was to the valley below. Whatever happened was very deliberate. They were broken up. They were smashed. We believe it was part of an ancient grid system which was used to enslave humanity. That's our theory. And what's interesting is when Jesus warns us again that it'll be like the days of Noah when the Son of Man returns, what do we have now? We have a grid. We saw today, or 2 days ago, I should say, the riots in Egypt. I watched them all day in Tahrir Square, the demonstrations, bordering on riots. Riots too strong a word. The riots were today. 2 days ago, the demonstrations in Cairo with the army. I watched the whole thing come down, live feed. And what I want to get to, the point I'm trying to make here, is that we watch these occurrences happening at the speed of live. That's unprecedented. We've never been able to do that before. Now it's commonplace. Satellites kick in, live feeds are there, satellite broadcasts them. What is it, a 4-second delay? In essence, we are watching everything happen in Egypt as if we were just sitting there, from the comfort of our living room in Egypt, overlooking Tahrir Square. I mean, that's how absurd it is. Well, with that in mind, the grid is back. And right now it's benevolent. But eventually, when the Antichrist does come, this grid will be used to enslave the entire human race, just like the book of Revelation tells us. You will not be able to buy, sell, or trade without that mark. And that's just the beginning. The grid is back. The surveillance is here. Big Brother is everywhere. This is why Jesus has to come back. Otherwise, as he points out, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive. His words, not mine. I think the most dire warning in all of Scripture is when Jesus tells us that unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive. It doesn't get any more severe and pregnant with meaning than those words. They are absolutely astounding, profound words that most people don't want to hear because it's not a feel-good message. And yet we are moving rapidly into the days which will precede his second coming. So,
L.A., back on this with the Greco-Roman and these demigods, is there any doubt in your mind then that this actually ties in with that, and that's where some of this, what that was, what we call Greek mythology, for example,
yes,
wasn't necessarily mythology then?
I agree. Chuck Missler certainly talked about this. Other people have talked about it, Tom Horn, and Dr. I.D. Thomas, my mentor. I mean, people have been, Pember certainly alluded to it. I believe that the demigods and the titans that we see talked about in Greek mythology is, in fact, talking about the Nephilim and fallen angels. It's both. Hercules might have been a fallen or a Nephilim, while his father could have been a fallen angel. So, who really is Zeus, right? So that's what I think, and I think it's Missler talked about this, that there's a linguistic tie between Satan and the Titans. So isn't that interesting? So yeah, I agree with you. I think the Greek mythos is steeped in what really happened. And remember, Greece is just a stone's throw away from where all this happened in the Middle East, just a stone's throw. And we believe also that the tribes, when Joshua and Caleb began to press into the Levant or Israel, the Promised Land, about 3,500 years ago, that there was an exodus, there was a diaspora of these giants. Many of the tribes fled northwards. Others, we believe, built ships. Thor Heyerdahl proved it with Kon-Tiki and Ra, that you can sail across the Atlantic Ocean, and with very little effort, you wind up in South America. So we believe that the Paracas people were perhaps a Nephilim tribe. They're certainly a hybrid race. The skulls that we saw, the elongated skulls there, were absolutely amazing. There's all these pictures in the book which show it. We were able to handle the skulls, test the skulls, weigh them, measure them, just amazing. And obviously photograph them like crazy. And these skulls are anomalous. A normal human skull has 4 plates: a frontal, 2 parietal, which is on top, and the occipital, which is the rear plate. And they are all sutured together. What I mean by that, it's like there are seams, and it looks like lines, sutures, which hold these plates together. And that's a normal human skull. Well, the Paracas skulls have a frontal, 1 parietal instead of 2, and an occipital. In other words, the suturing pattern is all wrong, and they are anomalous. I've shown them to 3 medical doctors who were absolutely taken aback by what they saw. I showed the skull to a forensic anthropologist who at first dismissed it as cradle headboarding, but later on, when I told him to look again, he raised his eyebrows and immediately looked at me and said, "Where did you get this?" So what's interesting about this is these skulls, many of them, not all of them, but many of them, show that the culture is engaged in cradle headboarding. They are deliberately misshaping the heads of infants. And this begs the question, why? Well, coexisting with these cradle-boarded heads are the real deal. In other words, coexisting with the heads that have been manipulated by human hands are the skulls which are elongated by themselves, which we believe have not been cradle headboarding. And this ties into some sort of genetic manipulation by an outside agency. And we were able to take some of the red hair from one of the skulls. And this skull is at least 2,000 years old. The hair is sort of an amber color, reddish amber color. And again, the Darwinian paradigm tells us that this shouldn't be here. We should see Native Americans with black hair that came across the Bering Land Bridge at the end of the last ice age. So this blows that whole theory right out of the water. It gets even better because we have a sample from this reddish-haired mummy that we found in Peru. We were able to take some of the hair and bring it back. And we took it into a laboratory and tested the hair with a machine that's called Raman spectroscopy. What that does is it measures the molecular structure of any given object and plots that on a graph. So we had a control sample, a normal human hair. We had a hair that had been dyed because we wanted to see if this reddish hair from Peru was dyed. We had the red hair that we got from the mummy in Peru. And then, of course, we had this blonde hair, which was given to us by a man who claimed to have been abducted and forced to have sex with a hybrid being who had long, thin, blondish, almost whitish hair. So we had 4 samples: human hair, dyed human hair, the hair from Paracas, Peru, from the red-haired mummy, and a white hair from a so-called hybrid being. The human hair on the Raman spectroscopy graph basically comes in, makes a nice little horseshoe shape, and disappears. Okay, the dyed hair comes in about the same place that the human hair, normal human hair, comes in, and then goes straight up the graph. The slope is just like 0 to 60, just like right up, and off we go, and off through the charts. Well, to our utter astonishment and amazement, the hair from the mummy and the hair from the so-called alien hybrid, the slopes mimic each other. In other words, they tracked. They were jog for jog throughout almost the whole graph. It was absolutely mind-boggling. And I've spoken to people. Our scientist who's working with us, Steve Colburn, told me he's going to write a paper for Nephilim, Armatrail with the Nephilim, Armatrail of the Nephilim, Volume 2, talking about the graph. We'll have the graph in the book, but the graph is shown in Watchers 6 right now. But what's amazing about this is it's sort of irrefutable. We're looking at something that seems to be a connection between antiquity and modernity. In other words, between the red hair from at least 2,000 years ago and the blonde hair. The same outside agency is manipulating the gene pool, because the slopes from Raman spectroscopy on both of these samples track together, which shouldn't be.
Well, L.A., that what you just brought up, this with these misshapen heads and all this, is one of the things my co-host, NJ, Nancy's her name, but we call her NJ, she wanted to talk about that a little bit, if that'd be okay, and she had another couple of questions, so I'd like to open up her mic and let her ask you a couple questions. There you go,
That's
NJ.
fine.
You've seen this. Go for it.
Well, thank you, L.A., for joining us tonight. This is intriguing. And yes, I have seen some of your watchers, but the cone heads that you mentioned, they did not have what I call the cradle cap. When my babies were born, they had the soft spot, and then the skull grew together.
Right.
That's what you call the temporal, or
no, that's the fontanelle. That hole in the skull is called the fontanelle. But
okay.
The fontanelle is on the top of the skull between the frontal and the two parietal plates. So
right.
Normal human being has two parietal plates on top. These skulls, the anomalous ones in Peru, only had one.
They only had one. Interesting.
Correct.
Very interesting. So
yeah, the photographs are in the book. It's an 8.5 by 11. It's an oversized book, and we did that specifically to really let people see what we saw. Without, unless you're there, it's hard to tell. But the photography, I did most of the photography in the book. It's really very sharp. Thank you, Canon photographic equipment, but very, very sharp. And it's like right there in your face, and it's irrefutable. We're looking at something. Something is going on here.
Well, see, and you also mentioned the babies, and I got to thinking as you were describing this that people, 2,000 years or however many years ago, probably would have wanted to emulate or
Correct.
mimic their god.
Correct. That's exactly what's going on.
Right.
Exactly what's going on. And
that,
we see this emulation all over the world. People were trying to create this shape for whatever reason, and we go back into the record, and we believe that these hybrid beings look like this.
Well, the pictures that come to my mind right off the bat is Egypt.
Sure.
The pharaohs, the
Absolutely.
the women in particular, with the elongated head.
Uh-huh.
So that makes me wonder. I've just had a curious question that popped in my head. In when God flooded the earth, and for obvious reasons, where did these Nephilim come from after the flood?
Well, there's
how do they get back into the
thought.
gene pool?
Well, there's two schools of thought. The one school, which is what the majority of scholars that believe in the Nephilim to begin with believe, is the text in Genesis says very clearly the Nephilim were on the earth, and also afterwards when the sons of God saw the daughters of men and had children by them. It's very clear. And that begs the question, what does "and also afterward" mean? And in my opinion, "and also afterward" means exactly what it says, and also afterwards. And where do we see it? We see it in Numbers 13. The Nephilim are in the promised land. How did they get there? The same way they got there the first time, in my opinion. Fallen angels procreating with the women of earth, creating a hybrid which wasn't supposed to be there. That's
so all the angels were not destroyed at that point. Just the
that's what
offspring.
I mean. Stop and think about this. Jump to the book of Revelation. Satan and his angels fight with Michael and his angels. Satan loses. It's a great eviction, and Satan is finally cast down to earth. Woe to the inhabitants of earth, because your enemy, the adversary, Satan the dragon, has now cast down to earth, and he knows his time is short. A key scripture. No, only the watcher angels that were in part of the first incursion were in chains. We hear that from Jude. We
Right.
know that. But guess what? Jude also tells us that there's something else going on, because it says in similar and like ways, in similar matter, in like matter, Sodom and Gomorrah went after going after strange flesh. Those two thoughts in the book of Jude, the angels leaving their first estate, right, and doing the unthinkable, those two thoughts are linguistically tied together. They're talking about the same type of thing in a similar way. The two thoughts are connected. And so, once again, look, in my book, The Cosmic Chess Match, I get into this in great depth. Because, once again, without the Nephilim, it's impossible to really see what's going on. We are involved in a seed war. And anyone who takes the mark of the beast will actually become, in my opinion, a modern-day Nephilim. This mark will change the host's DNA and make them so they are not human. They'll look human, they'll act human, but the DNA upgrade, that's how it'll be couched, will change the host into something that's not human. Thus we get the same judgment from the book of Revelation as we do in Sodom and Gomorrah, in the Levant, and in Genesis 6. They're destroyed. There's not one ounce of grace and mercy. You take the mark of the beast, you wind up in the lake of fire. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you say, well, why is that? Why would a loving God do that? Because, see, this is what I'm talking about. Unless we understand the game plan of the fallen one, of Satan, we have no idea what's going on. He has been trying to create man in his own image. He's the great imitator. It's a seed war that's been going on since Genesis, and it's been carried over into the modern era, and it's all around us. It's all around us. And the church sleeps.
Exactly, the church sleeps. Well, this begs another question. In this sort of context, so we have Nephilim on the earth now, today, in 2013.
Well, that's all conjecture, and so I really, I can't speak to that. We've had reports of black-eyed kids. We've covered that in Watchers 5. Black-eyed kids are these entities that show up at your house. Yeah, very creepy. They look like children, but they're not children, and their eyes are all black, and people are overcome with dread and fear and a presence and sense of evil when these kids show up and they say things like, "Let us in, it won't take long." What? It's just unbelievable. So we're seeing more and more reports like that. But as far as like actual hybrid beings, I would have to say that as of right now, I've heard reports, but I can't point to anything that is, showing that is happening. However, we believe that there is a breeding program. It's very vigorous. We've interviewed Dr. David Jacobs for Watcher 7, which will be out probably early fall. And our conclusions are, based on what Dr. Jacobs is saying, and we agree with him, that this breeding program is incredibly nefarious, and it's reached its zenith, and at some point we will see the integration of hybrid beings into our society, which will be a game changer.
yeah, which would be days of Noah. That brings the very different.
All over again, full circle.
Right. Well, the
crazy, huh?
Yo, to say the least. Actually, it's exciting too because it's wow. Jesus coming soon. We're here to be this generation that's possibly going to see this, if not our next generation. We're that close. I do believe we're actually very close.
No, we're right at the door. I agree with you.
Right. Well, now, we got a question in the chat, too, that says, and which you already answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyway because they put it in there. It says, can a mostly human Nephilim be redeemed by Christ? Let's say that only they have a few drops of contamination.
Well, but
I have seen people say yes or no.
This is where it gets really crazy, and it's like it can get nutso, and I have no answer to that. And so people go, well, I think I'm a Nephilim. Well, if you really think you're a Nephilim and you want to get saved, guess what? We'll pray with you. It's real
there
simple.
You go.
Yeah, it's real simple. We'll pray with you, and then we'll sort it all out with some DNA testing afterwards. But I mean, it's like so far, and look, I have some colleagues who look at this stuff and go, well, that's just horrible, LA. What if these people are Nephilim? Blah blah blah. You're telling them that they can't get saved. Look, I'm just telling you what the Bible's been saying, and the Bible basically states that anytime the Nephilim are there is total annihilation. Period. That's what's going on. Don't argue with me. Argue with the Scripture. It's there. Now if you want to pretend that it's not Nephilim, then that's fine. You can make it whatever you want to make it. I really don't care. My job, and I try to do it as best as I possibly can, is to warn people of what is coming. I'm a watchman, and that's what I do. And I'm just telling you what I see. And people have to do with that information whatever they want to do with that information. Some people will call me crazy. That's fine. The bottom line is this. At some point, and it's going to be soon because it's already manifesting like I've never seen it before, all this is going to become very, very self-evident. We won't be talking about this. We'll be talking about, well, L.A., they're telling us that, they were our gods, that they created us. So, what do you think about that, L.A.? I mean, they're here. They've given us free energy, and, it's a DNA upgrade, and it's like this is the missing link that we've all been waiting for. It's like, they have photographic film of Jesus, and, it's like this is all E.T., and the Vatican is even behind this thing, L.A. What's wrong with you? You're like back in the Stone Age, what's wrong? And see, that's what people don't get, and we're on this side of the revealing. We're on this side of disclosure. When disclosure happens, it's a flipping game changer, and people don't understand it. They don't get it. They don't understand the severity of the times that we are in. Are you aware in the month of April, 1,000 UFO sightings globally were reported?
1,000?
You really think it's swamp gas? Reflecting a weather balloon, reflecting Venus in a weather balloon caught in a flock of birds? Are you kidding me? 1,000.
Wow, that missed the mainstream media.
It's unprecedented. It is absolutely unprecedented what is going on. And the church, and this, I start most of my presentations with this little, it's not a caveat, but it's just sort of a little like, okay, let's examine this stuff, right? As Christians, we believe in the virgin birth, talking donkeys, floating axe heads, 2 gold coins that appear in a fish's mouth, staffs that when thrown out of the ground become serpents, men that walk on water, water that changes to wine, men that rise from the dead, men that are taken up into heaven in some sort of a fiery chariot, whatever the heck that is, bodies of water which just split in half and allow 3 million people to walk across on dry land, and on it goes. Do we realize how absolutely bonkers and nutso that really is? It's crazy. Go and just start telling people, my daughter, she got pregnant, but, she's a virgin and she still is a virgin. What? I mean, go tell somebody that you've been talking to your horse and your horse is talking back, like Balaam, the talking donkey, and that whole deal, right? I mean,
really?
This is what we believe in, and it's bananas, right? It's crazy stuff. It is. It's crazy stuff. But guess what? We're the same people that when we walk out of church, we just go click and we turn off our brains. Oh, there's no supernatural manifesting now. I don't have anything to worry about. Meanwhile, the supernatural is manifesting like I've never seen it before. 1,000 sightings in the month of April this year. It's crazy. We've got footage. We just came back from Mexico, my partner and I. We interviewed Jaime Maussan. The footage we saw was absolutely startling. It's irrefutable. It's undisputable. You can't look at it and go, oh, that's just swamp gas LA baloney. Please, let's not even, don't insult me with that. We've got footage from Turkey where you can actually see the beings in the craft. It's crazy. It's here. The church dithers. They won't deal with the subject. And so the coming great deception, the great falling away, as I call it, which we hear about in 2 Thessalonians, which says, the son of perdition, the man of sin, will not be revealed until the great falling away, until there is a rebellion. The word in the Greek is apostasia. It always means apostasy. It does not mean the rapture, as much as we want it to mean that. It does not mean that. It means what it says, and says what it means. It means the word apostasy. Another word you can use would be departure. Departure from what? The same thing, departure from the faith. It doesn't mean rapture. That's scary. So before the Antichrist is revealed, there'll be a great falling away. Christians don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear that, because that's not what we want to. We want to get out of here before we see all this stuff. Well, my reading of Scripture was this, that, and we don't know how long it is before the great falling away happens and the Antichrist is revealed. It can be a day. It can be 10 years. Who knows? Plenty of time for a rapture to happen in that area. But the bottom line is this. We are in a supernatural battle, which has been raging in an unseen dimension and sometimes spilling out over to ours for literally millennia. This thing is ramping up like I've never seen it before. The place to watch is the Middle East. Keep our eyes on Israel. Right now, who would have imagined the Arab Spring? And now the Egyptians just ousted Morsi. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You really can't. It's just mind-boggling.